In the business world, the success of many companies often measured in dollars, in pounds, in whatever currency you care to name. But more firms than ever, we understand, are looking beyond the bottom line and making it their business to strive for a bigger goal. It's called conscious capitalism. Is it for real? Welcome to Roundtable. Welcome to the programme. I'm David Foster. From the corporate giants, the car companies in this case, to the minnows of the market. Many of today's companies, we understand, are taking up causes as part of their missions. And we wondered whether it's more than just clever branding. Is the role of the company changing?
The traditional purpose for a business has been to pursue profit. Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman has said there is one and only one social responsibility in business: to use its resources and engage in activities that will increase its profits. But the tide is shifting towards what some are calling conscious or woke capitalism. Companies are beginning to address issues from social injustice, climate change and inequality. Patagonia are using their business to campaign for solutions to the environmental crisis. When former NFL player Colin Kaepernick protested against racism in 2016 and faced a backlash, Nike built an ad campaign around him and gave him a big money deal. According to PwC's Workforce of the Future survey, 88% of millennials want to work for a company whose values reflect their own. This new trend is sweeping across the business world, and customers and employees are demanding change. As companies evolve alongside society, what will they look like in the future, and how genuine are their efforts?
Very pleased to say that we welcome to the round table on this occasion Mark Goyder, who's founder of Tomorrow's Company, which encourages businesses, it says, to be a force for good. Kamini Gupta's here, lecturer in international business at King's College London. Paul Hargreaves, also chief exec of the food company Cotswold Fayre. We will explain what he's doing in this line in just a moment. And on the line we have Philip Booth, Professor of Finance, Public Policy and Ethics at St Mary's University, who is... Philip, may I say, first of all, from what I've read, you seem to be a little bit cynical about this idea of corporate responsibility.
Well, I'm very much in favour of the importance of ethics in business and in business activity. And indeed, I was quoted in The Economist a couple of weeks ago saying that separating ethics from economics and talking about economics in purely technical terms is rather like separating ethics from sex and just talking about sex in biological terms. So I'm very much in favour of business ethics, people behaving honestly in a trustworthy fashion, banks not mis-selling products and this type of thing. But I am a bit sceptical of corporate social responsibility agendas, which often give a lot of power to managers to pursue their own agendas, sometimes actually at the expense of the core purpose of the business, and sometimes in a way which is, I think, very often just window dressing. And if you look at some of the most prominent CSR companies of the last few decades, they include names like Enron, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Volkswagen, all of which have been caught doing extremely unethical things. So I just like to go back to basics and think about business ethics and businesses ensuring and embedding a culture of ethics within their organisations as a starting point for good business behaviour.
OK, so it's rather like you get a big organisation that sort of says we are behaving well by building a community pavilion, when in fact within the corporation itself there's a rotten culture. And I saw you nodding at some of what Philip was saying, Paul. I mean, can I just try and describe what Cotswold Fayre did when it first started? You set out to employ a number of people who otherwise might have been unemployable, to treat the workforce, the people you were supplying food to, and the supply chain, each one in a generous manner, if you like, so, an ethical manner.
Yeah, I came from the charitable sector and realised the limitations of that in terms of making the world a better place. So when I started a business, which I was forced to, wasn't a conscious decision actually, but due to running out of money, started a company to try and feed my children, and thought actually it was a good thing to do to employ people who were finding it difficult to get work. So we had, of our first 5 employees, we had one ex-drug addict, one ex-alcoholic, and one guy just come out of prison. Now,
so this was not a fig leaf, as described, the corporate window dressing that Philip alluded to.
I do agree with Philip, though, that I am also very sceptical about CSR because...
We should say that is what businesses shorten to corporate social responsibility.
Because often in those large companies, it is an add-on to make them look better in front of their consumers. Yeah. And consumers actually now want a lot more than that. They want the good, if you like, being right at the DNA of the company, not just an add-on or we ought to do our little bit for the world. No, it needs to be in the DNA of the very company that you're working for.
And your book, Creating a Better World Through Purpose-Driven Businesses, Forces for Good. We'll get on to the ethos of this in just a moment. And Mark, I will come to you in just a moment because you've been able to look at a lot of firms that are doing this. But Kamini, first of all, do businesses have to be a force for good in the modern world?
I wouldn't say they have to be. I think there are businesses on a full spectrum, starting from those that are completely profit-driven to those that are only purpose-driven, and you'll find organizations on the full spectrum. I want to take a moment to agree with Paul that I think there is a difference between looking at purpose as a responsibility or social goals as a responsibility and looking at it as your purpose, which is integrated into everything you do. If you look at it as a responsibility, you're likely to think of it as something you have to do. You take money from the profits and you put it here and it goes away. But if you think of it as purpose that's integrated into everything you do, then you try to find win-win solutions where purpose can actually create profits for you.
And you can do that quite easily, can you? You can be a profitable capitalist-run business that cares.
So let's not be under any illusions. I won't say it is easy to do by any stretch. Having said that, we do have examples of organizations that are pursuing profits purposefully, and there's research that shows that organizations that are purposeful, that have sustainability built into them, outperform organizations that are only profit-driven. So what I would say is it's not easy to do, and therefore we should shift the question from saying profit versus purpose to saying how can we actually enable organizations to more effectively pursue profits in a purposeful manner.
So profits and purpose.
Absolutely.
Rather than versus. Let's come on to this one, Mark, if I may. Your book, Entrusted Stewardship for Responsible Wealth Creation. On the back, it says, stewardship means we manage, nurture and grow what has been entrusted to us so that we hand it over in better condition to the next generation. Does that apply in this sense, in the way that we're talking about now?
Absolutely. I think we need to pull together a number of pieces of the jigsaw. First of all, to me, the argument about CSR is about 15 years old. And I think I remember doing a piece called Redefining CSR then, where I said there's a difference between conviction CSR and cosmetic CSR. And sure, I can easily agree on that. But I think we need to move beyond the way the argument is cast as shareholder versus stakeholder, and actually to say, hang on a minute, let's go back to the entrepreneur. Let's go back to the way a business like Paul started. It's very interesting to hear him talk about starting a business for reasons other than purely making money. It was partly because he needed to feed his children, but the purpose he chose was one that was very much about the human needs. And so I think the starting point is, from the very start of businesses, you cannot say that a business person starts a business saying, one day I'm going to find some anonymous shareholders I've never met who are going to get dividends out of my company. That's not how the world works. The world works, and the markets work because entrepreneurs see a need. And usually it's a human need. It may be anything from gambling through to feeding people, through to financial services, well, gambling, but it's a human need that we're talking about. Once you accept that, then I think the next thing we need to talk about is stewardship. It is the idea, which are the businesses that have been most successful in the long term? Most successful single business sector, the family business sector. US research, those family businesses which have a listing, big shareholding by families, but also other people, outperform listed companies which don't have that anchor shareholder, that long-term focus. The research that Kamini was talking about, companies which have a clear purpose to which people can relate, the evidence is they're more successful. So it isn't shareholder versus stakeholder. It's actually about how do we get the conditions in which organisations can thrive in the long term?
Philip, and this is open to anybody, but I'll go to Philip first of all. PricewaterhouseCoopers Workforce of the Future survey found that millennials, 88% of them want to work for a company whose values reflect their own. I contrast that with a survey this year, another survey, that says that only 16% of business leaders, this is in the UK, said that this kind of attitude to business is one of their top 3 priorities. So the young people of today see it as an absolute must, but the business leaders don't yet.
On the whole, I think businesses are reacting to the changing needs and desires of workforces. We certainly perceive that in universities. We tell our students, we try to teach our students not just to be ethical in whatever walk of life they go out into, but we also tell them that businesses value the fact, or are likely to value the fact, that our students regard ethics in business or in charity or in government, if they're going to other fields.
Can I just throw that one back into here? Because I'm sort of sensing that you think my figures may be wrong and I've been a little bit selective or unselective, if you like. But I'm wondering, Kamini, whether you agree with the premise that business leaders at the moment perhaps aren't paying enough attention to what their future employees might see as absolutely vital.
I would tend to agree with Paul on this, because so in August we had the Business Roundtable, which is the group of more than 180 top CEOs from the US come out and say that we are re-articulating our vision and saying we are not only here to create value for shareholders, but for all our stakeholders, including customers, communities, employees and governments. So there is certainly now a growing recognition. Whether that has translated into practices yet is relatively disputable.
So it's moving in the right direction.
Exactly. It may not have caught up completely, but it is, I think, certainly moving in the right direction.
Don't you find it fascinating that the young people, the millennials, are basically saying, it never occurred to me when I went to work for my first local newspaper to ask exactly what it was doing for the community, whether it was employing the right people, what its profits were, et cetera, et cetera. But young people now seem to be saying, it's not just a salary I want, it's not necessarily a long-term career with you, but I want to know that you're doing something right, because that makes me feel good.
Yeah, and I think about 8 out of 10 of our last group of employees that we've taken on have all been millennials, because they want to work for a business that's making a positive difference in the world. But it's not about, it's about better businesses, because if people are motivated, want to be there, enjoy coming to work, and one of the reasons they enjoy coming to work is because they're making the world a better place, you're going to have a better company, you're going to have a more profitable company too. Yeah, it's not always easy, but these companies that are doing good stuff are actually becoming more profitable too.
David, can I challenge Philip a little bit? I think, Philip, you're talking about a perfectly important agenda when you're talking about the importance of ethics, but I think that's a different conversation. I think ethics in business is like breathing. I mean, the minute a business stops being ethical and is found out, and there's only a matter of time, it ceases to exist. It loses its license to operate. So I don't think we're talking here about, oh gosh, there's an interesting trend that businesses are suddenly realizing they need to be ethical. I think we're talking about something else. I think we're talking, first of all, about self-interest. And I think we're talking, secondly, about the values, not only, incidentally, of millennials. So in terms of enlightened self-interest, there is no doubt that the businesses which have created value over decades and centuries are the businesses which commit themselves to having a purpose that meets human needs. And there's loads of evidence of that. There's a Japanese study of companies which have lasted more than 200 years. There's US studies of successful brands. You can go on and on about the research. So there's enlightened self-interest in saying, I need my business to have a purpose that my people, my customers, and my society can relate to.
And you wouldn't necessarily be fraudulent if you didn't really hold those values, if you were only stating them because you saw it as being in the best interests of your business and your employees.
I think it's entirely fraudulent if you don't mean it. And I think you'll be found out. And I think
But if you operate in the same way as somebody who does believe it,
well, look at
the end result is the same, that people feel rewarded for their jobs, etc., etc., you're not fraudulent, are you?
You're a great believer in the power of words, but look at WeWork. whose IPO has just failed. And one of the reasons it failed was because of the entirely overblown claims about transforming global consciousness that was being made by their CEO. But I wanted to come on to the wider point about enlightened self-interest in society. The Edelman Trust Monitor is telling us that something like 4 out of 5 citizens globally feel it's not just they don't trust business people or they don't trust journalists or they don't trust politicians. There's something else going on. The survey shows that they don't feel the system is working for them. We have a capitalist system which it functions in a one-dimensional way very efficiently, but people feel remote from it. And from the financial crisis particularly onwards, there's a change in awareness going on to which business is having to respond. And the only way that we're going to close that gap between the public and the system, which should be serving them, is if we have businesses which have purposes to which people can relate, and businesses which are transparent and accountable so people can tell between the ones who talk it and the ones who do it.
OK, let's start with Philip on this point, because I want to ask every one of you how you think you spot the fraudsters.
Fraudsters do end up weeding themselves out. The businesses that do things very badly in the end get found out, sometimes by regulators, but very often also by markets or in other ways. And profits are an indicator, and normally a pretty good indicator, that you're fulfilling the needs and desires of the people with whom you're dealing relatively effectively, whether that's coming from well, the profits are arising obviously from the sale of goods, but also good employment relationships is likely to lead to higher profits too. So I very much agree with the sort of enlightened self-interest aspect of it. But I don't agree that all businesses really, if they don't behave ethically, they do necessarily get found out. They might well underperform. But I think if you look in the financial services sector, for example, I think you'll still find a lot of questionable and unethical practice. And there's a, in my view, rather undesirable response to this by having millions and millions upon words and pages of regulation to try to make people behave better. And that's not actually an effective response.
Or
so
does
I would still argue
that
businesses don't
try and bring some of the others in, if I may.
necessarily in the way that they should.
Philip, sorry, does it matter whether it's enlightened self-interest? In other words, you're doing it because it's the only way that your business is going to survive, and you know, and therefore your employees still have a job and you have a salary. Does it matter whether it's that or whether it's a truly held belief?
Employees, customers, suppliers, they will see through people who aren't authentic.
Does it matter, though?
Absolutely, because it won't work. You need to be authentic and you need to be transparent.
Can I stop you? You said you started a business because you needed to feed your children, not because you felt it was your ethical responsibility
but why
to do
is
so.
it either or?
And yet you're successful.
But why is it either or? Why can't somebody start a business because they need to feed their children, but they want to do it in a way that actually meets a human needs and gives them a bigger satisfaction?
So
I don't see the either or.
So at the beginning of the show, you talked about the bottom line. We have a bottom line, but it's a triple bottom line. It's about profit, planet, and people.
And did you know that the day you started?
Well, it's been articulated better in recent years, and we're a B Corp, and we are measured now on all those three things.
Explain very quickly what B Corp is to those who don't understand.
B Corps are companies that are good for the world, but have chosen to be measured on how good they are for the world. So we get measured every 2 or 3 years on how good we are for people in the supply chain, our own people, and how good we are for the environment. You can't do the CSR stuff and not mean it and get measured for all that.
Because this is something I read. This is not a quote that I've made up myself, but I saw it earlier today and it appealed to me. The question is whether a shark can be taught moderation. and as you were saying, it's not an either-or. But the fact is, if you're a capitalist, aren't you? And that's what this programme is about.
Right, but I think the definition of capitalism is changing as well, or the conception. I mean, Milton Friedman told us that the only social responsibility of business is to create profits. And we held that...
Within the rules.
Within the rules, absolutely. Within the rules of the game, lawfully. But that conception of business is changing. nowadays. But yes, the headline is what remained with a lot of people for a long time, and that's the way, in fact, business schools for a long time taught young managers as well. But that conception is certainly changing now. Now, to the point of enlightened self-interest or only or altruism, it doesn't have to be only altruism. It is self-serving as well as serving others as well. So it's an and. And to your point earlier on, could it be fraudulent? I think you will be if you don't mean it at all.
Okay, so you all think that. You all think.
Yeah.
I know there's something you want to say, but I want. There was a note that I was left about something you said, which was you maintain that the current capitalist model simply takes rather than contributes. How do you change that?
Well, I think there's this distinction between extractive capitalism, and you see it in the worst of private equity, for example, where it's what can we take out of the company in 4 years and then make it look good and put it back on the market.
Another way, yeah.
So that's extractive capitalism. The stewardship capitalism is contrasted with that because actually the stewards, both the board and the investors, and in a family business it's very much the same people, are saying we've got something of value here, we're going to grow the value and we're going to hand it on in better condition. Now, you were talking about sharks, and that brings me to think about the role of the City of London and Wall Street. Because in that area, I would agree with you, the sharks are still untamed in many ways. There is, and we've been very involved in it in Tomorrow's Company, and Stewardship Asia have too, there is a change going on in the investment community. But here we have the paradox. Ordinary people put their savings into pension funds. Pension funds put their savings into companies. The ordinary people who put their savings into those pension funds and they go into companies are people who have kids who want to work in those companies. They're people who want to earn pensions in 20, 30, 40 years' time when they can still breathe the air and live at a livable temperature in the planet. So the idea that you can set the shareholder against the ordinary person and how they're going to experience capitalism is nonsensical because they end up being
it is the
they're
best
the same
system
people.
in an imperfect world.
Well, no, but excuse me, the point is that it's the time horizon that is applied. Yes, if capitalism learns how to incorporate the needs of the future into its behavior in the present, we have a capitalism that's the best servant of society. If capitalism can't incorporate the needs of the future, we need to change the rules, partly by the behaviour of individual pension funds and institutional investors, and partly by the role of government.
Which leads me to a subheading in your book, page 168, Forces for Good, moving away from narcissism.
Yeah, I mean, in our company, we would never make a decision for profit that was detrimental to people or planet, and that's how it's a servant of the whole thing. The whole capitalist system is generally about selfishness, particularly in the Western world. And if you go to other parts of the world, they don't think like we think anyway. They would think it absolutely criminal. It probably is the way some companies have behaved over the last few years, and they look now at what we're doing and thinking, why the hell didn't they do this years ago? Because this is normal life. This is about the community. It's about looking after the planet.
But as long as you have one bad apple, then everything else is going to end up poisoned by it. And this is the difficulty with this, is it not, Kamini? Because unless everybody does the same thing, there's going to be one person in there taking everything.
It's not necessarily one bad apple, but I think I just want to go back to something Mark said and link your question to that. I mean, I think in some ways this is a trade-off between short-term thinking and long-term thinking. So purpose and profit are more conflicting in the short term, but they may be much more aligned in the long term. Now, the systems currently are such that the incentives for many people are aligned towards the short term, which is why this conflict becomes starker. If we can fix the systems, as you were saying earlier, so that the incentives are aligned more towards long-term survival, long-term growth, long-term value for all stakeholders, then that conflict becomes much less acute.
Do you agree that unless we all do the same thing, then it's going to be very, very difficult? It's a bit like collective responsibility, isn't it?
That's a very important paradox you're raising here, because Philip was saying earlier that markets are places where you need the diversity of different approaches. That's true. Equally, it's true, actually, that again, you get the most wealth created when you get good collaboration. You see that in the complicated supply chains of the car industry, which is coming under such pressure now with Brexit, for example. So I think that the real focus now needs to be on saying, yeah, we've all got an instinct that we need a better capitalism. So now let's try and make the agenda practical. What does it mean for boards of companies? What does it mean for the mandates that pension funds set? What does it mean for the way government changes fiduciary duty? And there's a series, and that's what our book is about. There's a whole series of practical steps in each of those areas in a joined up way, without threatening market disciplines, could actually allow us to factor more of the needs of the next generation. I've just become a grandfather for the second time last week. I'm concerned we have a capitalism that actually works for my granddaughter in 30, 40, 50 years' time. And most human beings are not investing their money saying, I don't care about that. Where most of us do care about the next generation.
It's not just what the next generation says it wants at the moment, it's what many of you here believe, I wish we had more time, believe the next generation actually needs to survive in the world. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, your book, Entrusted, highly recommended by the Financial Times, and Forces for Good, already helping you towards your retirement, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Philip, we lost you for a little while, but good to see your face before we go. Thanks for being on the Roundtable, and thank you also for taking part. I'm David Foster. I've enjoyed the discussion. Could have gone on for a lot longer. Thank you for watching. Hope to have your company next time. Goodbye for now.